Hi everyone, welcome to this new video. My name is Aditya and on this channel I talk about Kubernetes, blockchain and software in general. And in today's video, we are going to create operators for Kubernetes using Golang. So without any further ado, let's get started. So let's first understand what operators are. So operators are basically the programs that are written for Kubernetes, and basically they try to maintain the desired state with the actual state with the help of custom resources. So what happens is you create custom resources, and based on the definition of those resources, operator takes the decision of maintaining the state of the Kubernetes. So operators are the client of Kubernetes API server that basically runs the controller and try to maintain the state of the Kubernetes cluster. So we have some inbuilt controller in the Kubernetes. Some of them are like deployment controller or replica set controller. Basically, they try to maintain the state what you define in with the actual state. So let's say you define the replicas as 2 in the deployment. So the deployment control will ensure that the actual state that is there in the cluster versus the desired state that you define in the spec, they both are meeting. And in today's video, we are going to create an operator which will be scaling up or scaling down the resources based on the time that you have specified. So let's say you have a use case where you want to scale the resources, let's say deployment at a specific duration of time. Then basically that controller will do the task for you. So you can basically define the starting time and the ending time, like the duration on which you want to scale or scale down the number of replicas in the deployment, and then the controller will basically try to maintain that state. So what I meant is, so let's say you have a deployment which you want to scale it at a specific duration of a time. So let's say between between 5 a.m. to let's say 10 a.m. you know that this service is going to get the most of the traffic, and you want to have, let's say, 5 replicas at that time. But let's say between 6 p.m. to let's say 8 p.m. you know at the time the traffic is not that much high on this service, so you want to have only 2 replicas at the time. So operator is going to take the decision, like it is going to basically scale up or scale down the deployment based on the time duration that you have specified. So in this case, our operator is going to scale up the replicas between 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. and make it to 5. But during this time, which is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., it will make the replicas to in the deployment. So for this, we are going to use the Operator-SDK to create the operator. And let me just quickly jump to my ID, and from there, let's get started. Okay, so I'm in my ID, and this is an empty directory. We have nothing here. So let's first basically create the operator project. So for that, we have to initialize the project, and we have to pass the plugin as go/v3, and then you can give the domain name, any domain name that you have. And basically these other detail like owner and repo thing, you can basically define as per your details. So let's hit enter, and this should ideally create a project for us with some scaffolding. And from that, after that we will create the types, and we will create the controller loop. Okay, so the project is initialized, and if we see here, we can see that some of the files got created, and now we have to create the API resource. And basically API is the Go type or the object type that we have to create. So so now let me just create the API. So the command for creating the API is Operator-SDK create API, and then basically you give the kind, whatever kind you want to give. And in our case, we are going to give the kind as scalar. So if you remember, whenever you create a pod or deployment, you give the kind as pod or deployment in the manifest file. So this is the same kind that we have to use here. Like when we are actually creating up the resources, the custom resources, we will be specifying the type as scalar, and then we want to have the group as API and the version as alpha v1. Let's hit enter. So yes, it is asking us to create, it is asking if we want to create the resource. So yes, we want to create the resource. We also want to create the controller, and it will basically create the API and the controller for us. And API is the place where we will define the structure of our custom resource, like how it should look like. And control is the part where we will be defining the business logic, like how we want to scale it or scale down. Okay, so both APIs and controller is created. Now, if we go and see here, we can see that there is a folder with name API, and here you can see that we have one type which got generated, which is scalar underscore types, and this is the place where we will be defining the structure of our custom resource. Uh, let's go and see the controller as well. So if you go here, you can see that there is a controller, scalar underscore control, and this is the part where we will be defining our reconciliation logic or the control logic, basically where we will be making the deployments or the scale. Basically we will be scaling or scaling down those deployments. So let's also see some of the configuration or some of the example manifest that are generated. So if you go to this config/crd location, and if you go to patches, let's first make the manifest. So we have a command which is make manifest. This will basically create the manifest file for the custom resource definition, and as well as some custom resource, some sample custom resource. Okay, so if you see here, we got a basis folder, and inside this we have the custom resource definition. So this is the definition, like how our custom resource should be structured. Let me show you the sample as well, like the sample custom resource that will be generated as per the requirement. So right now there is nothing, and what we want to do is we want to have some let's say I want to make my custom resource something look like this, where we have start, and let's say the value of the start could be any time. In our case it was 5, the starting time was 5 a.m, right? If you see here, between 5 a.m to 10 a.m we want to have the replicas as 5. So the same kind of structure we can create here, and let's say end time is 10, and the replicas I want to have, let's say I want to have 5 replicas during this time. Now let's define the deployments as well, like which deployment should be scaled up or scaled down based on this configuration. So for that, I want to have the structure something like this, where I want to have a deployment object, and inside that it should be basically an array of deployments, where I can specify the name of the deployment and as well as the namespace of that deployment. And first let me give the name, and the second parameter will be namespace. Okay, and the name, let's say, let me give the name as ABC, and the namespace can be let's say default. Okay, so something like this I want to have my custom resource look like. So for this we have to define this type in the structure in the custom, basically in the API or in the custom resource type. So if you go here inside the API, we have the scalar type, and let's start the let's start implementing this. So here you can see that this is the type scalar, and here we have spec, and inside the spec we want to have this similar kind of a structure. So if you go here, this is inside the spec, so we will be modifying whatever is there inside the spec. If I go to types here, and this is coming from scalar spec. So if you go scalar spec, you can see that there is right now there is this sample field provided. So in our case, let me just quickly put whatever fields that we discussed here. Okay, so I have added the types, and here you can see that we have a field start, end, replicas, and deployment. And deployment is an array of namespace name, where we are giving the name and namespace property here. So I think now the schema is ready for us. We can just quickly generate the manifest and see, we'll be able to see that these properties are there in the custom resource definition as well. So if I do make manifest, it will basically generate the custom resource definition for us, and we should be able to see that. So if you go here, this is the custom resource definition, and here we can see that now we have properties something like this is the property called deployments, and this is an array, and here you can see that the properties inside this is name and namespace, and again these properties are of type string. If you scroll down here, we can see the replicas as well, and replica is integer in our case. So we have this end date, end timing, and the start timing as well. We can see all these details here. Okay, so now we have defined the schema, like how the custom resource should look like. But now let's try to define the controller logic, basically which will be scaling up or scaling down the replicas of deployment. So if we go to this scalar controller, here basically we have to implement our logic. So now let's try to get the instance of the scalar instance. So I can do r.get, and basically here I have to pass the context. So I can pass the context directly, and here I have to pass the object, basically with which object we want to fetch from the Kubernetes. So we want to fetch this scalar. So let's keep this as scalar here, and we have to also pass the namespace here. So we have to pass the namespace name. So we can give request dot namespace name, and this is going to return us an error. So what we can do, we can just check if we have error, and if we have error, then we can basically uh, return from here. Okay, so now let's say in case if we don't have the error, then probably we can basically fetch the start time, end time, and basically see if that end time or start time is within the current time, and then we can basically scale the number of replicas based on the time. So I can do start time, and start time should be present in my in the scalar instance. So I can do scalar dot spec dot start, and similarly I can get end time as well, and I can do scalar dot spec dot end, and now I can get the replicas here. So replicas I can get from scalar dot spec dot replicas. So now we have all the three properties, and now let's check the current what's the current time in hours, and then we can basically do an if condition. If the start time and end time is within the current time range, then we can scale the replicas. So here I can do time dot utc dot r, and this will give me the r. Basically it's I think time dot now dot utc dot r, and this will give me the r, and I think it returns error as well. So let's do current r. Okay, now we have the current time, and we can basically do a if statement, and we can scale the replica based on that. So let me just write the if statement. So if basically the time is, if the current r and the start time, and the if basically the start time is less than current r, or if the current r is basically less than the end time, then basically we have to scale the deployment in that case, which is, so now I can basically do simple, I can basically fetch the deployments that we have, and then we can scale them. So if you remember the custom resource that we have, this is an array of deployment. So what we can do, we can just loop over this deployment, and we can basically get the name and the namespace, and then we can fetch the deployment and update it. So I can just do a for loop here, for range, and this loop should be on spec dot basically scalar dot spec dot deployments, and let me just call it as deploy, and I don't need this argument. So now I can basically simply get the deployment. So I can do deployment is basically a instance of v1 dot. Okay, and now I can simply do r dot get, and here I have to pass the context. So I can simply pass the context here, and here we have to pass the namespace name. So I can pass the namespace name in the form of I can basically use the types dot namespace name, and here I can fill those two properties, like I have to give the namespace and the name. So the namespace we can easily get from scalar dot spec dot, or we can basically get it from deploy. So I can do deploy dot namespace, and here I can do deploy dot name. Okay, let me just import this. Okay, now I have to also pass this deployment, so that this will get the value filled in this variable, and this will also return us an error. So let's do the error handling. So if we get the error, then basically we can simply return from this from this loop. Else we can basically scale the deployment. So what we can do, since now this property already has the deployment details, so we can check basically the replicas, if it is equal to the number of replicas that we want to have. Then if it is not equal to the number of replicas, then basically we can basically scale them. So if this is the condition, then we can basically scale it. So here we can see there is some mismatch error. So okay, let me let's make this as in 32. This is not in 32, so let's go and modify this in 32. Okay, so now we don't have an error, and now if this is the condition, then basically we can scale. So we can basically do r dot update, and we can just pass the context here, and we can pass the object that we want to update. So we want to update this deployment, so I can just simply pass this deployment, and again this will return me an error, so I can handle that error. So now one more thing, so here in the result section we can basically pass the time at which this this controller loop should be called again. And what I meant is, let's say if you don't pass this any value here, then this reconciler loop will not be called again and again. So we have to give a time here, like after which we want to call this entire piece of program again and reconcile the state of cluster. So there is this property called requeue after, and I can just pass time dot duration, and let's say I pass time dot seconds. Let's say I want to reconcile this at every 30 seconds. So basically this this loop will be called every 30 seconds. So now I think we are good with the implementation for now. We'll try to update it, but let's first do the make manifest, because we just updated this the definition of the this type here. So let it run, and then we can basically deploy the custom resource, and then we can also run the operator locally. Let me also create a cluster here. I am going to create a local kind cluster. Okay, so the cluster is ready. Now let's apply the now let's first install the custom resource definition CRD. So let me just copy the path, and I can do k apply -f, and it's in config, and it's in config / CRDs. Yep, so custom resource definition is applied. We can do basically, if we want to check, we can do k get CRD, and we can see that this CRD is present right now. Now we can just start this operator. So for that we have to just do make run, and this should start the operator locally. Let me split the terminal meanwhile, so that we can apply the custom resources from other side. Okay, so the operator has started, and we can see the logs here as well. Now let's open this custom resource, which was this one, and this will basically try to scale this deployment. So first let's create a deployment ABC, and so that after that we can apply this custom resource, and we should be able to see that if our operator is scaling up or scaling down the replicas. So I can just create a deployment here, or let me just name this as Nginx. Okay, so now let's create the Nginx deployment. So I can do k create deploy, and I'm going to give the name as Nginx and the image as also Nginx. This will create a deployment with one replica. And now let's try to deploy this custom resource, and basically this custom resource will start looking at the deployment at 5 AM. So, and by the way, like these are the UTC time, so that's the operator is written in consider with the UTC time, and this is 10 AM. Again, this is in UTC, and I can just write this. These are the UTC time, and during this time the number of replicas for this particular deployment should be 5. So let's try to deploy this. So I can do k apply, and this is in config samples. So it will start deploy, and then we will be able to see the status here. So we got one log here, which is of reconcile call, And let's do one more thing. Let's try to see the time, like what's the current time as per the controller in the UTC format. So I can do, I can basically simply do log dot info, and I can just print the current time r. Let me do fmt dot sprintf, and I can do current time, and then percentage d, and here I can pass the current time now. Okay, let's try to run this again, and then like based on the current time, like what's the current time in the operator, then we can basically adjust, we can try to adjust the value of this, the resource that we created. Let's delete this. Let's delete this instance. This is present in config/sample/API v1, and now we can see that the current time is 17. It's in UTC format, 17 hours. So what we can do, like just to test it out, we can put some higher range here, let's say 20 AM, and like this will be obviously PM, and which will be like this time we have defined in the UTC format. So now let's try to apply this resource, and let's see first before, like what's the current replicas we have for this particular deployment. So I can do kget pods, and it should show me only one instance of the Nginx. But as soon as we apply this, if everything works fine, then it should scale up the number of replicas. So let's do kget pods. You can see that we got the request, and if I do kget pods, okay, it didn't apply the patch. Okay, ideally it should have increased the replicas to 5. Let's see what could be wrong here. And by the way, like based on this time duration, like whatever we have specified, you can see that after every 30 seconds, this control loop will be called automatically. So that just to ensure that we are trying to maintain the actual state with the desired state. Okay, so not sure what's the problem here is. Let's see this again. So we have given the start time as 5 AM, and 20 is basically it's the 12, it's a 24-hour format, and this is also fine. Like the name is Nginx and the namespace is default. Let's see here, namespace is deploy.namespace, and we are looping over the deployment. We got namespace here, we got the name, and this is the place where we are setting up this. Okay, let's try to do some debugging here. So let me put the debug statement at various places. So I can simply say this, and I can simply say condition matched, which means that this is here, log will appear here, and then I can also go ahead and see if the value is getting populated. So I can do deployment, and let's do it as %v deployment. Okay, now let's try to run this again. So if the specs, if the current deployment spec has the replicas not equal to the number of replicas that is specified, then only we are going to update it. Let's try to run this again. Let's delete it. Okay, so it has started. Let's run this again. Okay, we can see we got the deployment. Like this is the Nginx deployment, and let me see like why we are not, the pods are not getting scaled up. here. So it's not getting scaled up. I think we have some problem here where this property is not matching. So let's do a in log statement here, trying to update deployment. Let's run this again and let's delete that as well. Okay, let's apply that. Okay, we can see we got the message here. So it's trying to update, but it's not able to update it. So we correctly got the deployment here. You can see the replica is 1, and if the replicas are not mismatching, and if they are mismatching, then simply go and update it. Okay, I think I got the issue. So if this is not equal, then basically we have to set the deployment.spec. We are basically not setting up the value. So it's replicas equal to whatever replicas we want to specify here. And I think after this, it should be good. So let's run this again. So right now also, if we see the pod, we have only one pod, and now it's running. Let's try to apply the our custom resource, and here we can see we got the log statement. And if I do k got pods now, we can see these pods are scaled up, and this loop is running every 30 seconds. So in case if there is some if there is a new custom resource, let's say I define this custom resource from 5 a.m. till 20th, which is equivalent to 8 p.m. in the night, and let's say I define one more resource, then basically other resource can take from here. So what I can do, I can say that it should start from 21 and go till 4, and this should be PM, and this should be AM, 4 AM. Let's try to apply this again. So hope I guess there will be no change in the number of replicas. And at this point of time, let's say if you feel that at this point of time the number of replicas that you need is you need lower number of replicas, then basically you can set the values here and you can apply it. And at this point duration of time, basically this this controller will go and basically check for and will update the value. So if I apply it again, it should now bring the values to maybe, I think the values will be same like what it used to be earlier, because it's not in the time range. And yep. So also we can just optimize the code a bit more. Like what we can do, we can just have a function which is going to scale or scale up or scale down based on the value that we are passing on. So I have already written the implementation for that. Let me put that implementation here. Okay, and let's do one more thing. Let's try to okay, so this is the function scale deployment, which is going to scale the number of replicas based on the condition that we have. Okay, and now let's do one more thing. Let's try to maintain the okay, I have some error here. I can remove this. Okay, so now let's try to do one more thing. Let's try to have a status on the our replica. So if basically on our custom resource, so if I do get maybe the name of our resource is this one, scalar, and let's see what all resources we have. Okay, so here you can see, oh, we have only one resource, and if we try to describe this resource, we will be able to see all the properties that we have defined. But let's have one more property here, which can be the status, which will be showing us the status as like success or failed, so that we are able to track like if the deployment, if the scaling got failed or succeeded. So what we can do, we can again go to types here, and there is this structure. You can see this is basically corresponding to the structure that we are seeing down here. Basically you can see that all the properties that are specified here, these are also listed here. So we can have one more property, which is scalar status, and in the scalar status we can basically define the status as like if it is failed or if it is passed. So this is a string which will have value like, let's say, succeeded and failed, and I can define the value somewhere. So let's create the constants here, and now we can basically use this value in the controller code. So what we can do, we can, in the scale deployment function, we are basically doing the same scaling up and scaling down. So I can here basically at the time of updation, when we are updating the deployment, if we see that update got failed, then we can set the status as let's say failed. So I can do scalar dot status, and it can be failed. And similarly, if it is success, then here we can have the status as success, and then we are basically trying to update the status. So using r.status, you can update the status field in the custom resource. Yep, so this looks good to me. We have to do make manifest again because we made the changes in the types file, and we will have to also apply the custom resource definition so that the new definition is applied in the cluster. Okay, so this is also done, and if I just run this, it should let me just delete the custom resource that we had. Now let's apply that, and we should be able to see the status. So let me just remove this one, and if I do k apply, so this time we should see some status as well. So if I do k describe scalar sample, we should have some status like if it got applied or not. So here you can see the status is success and the replicas were updated. Okay, so this was it for this video. In the next video we can see like how we can deploy this this operator to the cluster. So right now this operator is running locally through make run, but you can basically package this custom this operator and ship it in the form of a Docker image, and then you can use this in your application. Also, I want to show you some more things. So this operator SDK is built on the top of kubebuilder, and we can leverage some of the kubebuilder features here, like the validation part. So let's say you can set the, let's say for start time, we want to have the maximum and the minimum value defined, like the validation. Those validations also we can define in the code, and based on the validation that we have defined, the custom resource definition will also be generated with those validation in place. So let's say for start time, we want to have the validation. Let's say this should be a required field, and the maximum value should be 23 and the minimum value should be 0. So we can define the validation in the form of kubebuilder annotations. So you can see that you can define the validation like maximum as 23 and the minimum as 0, and the validation is required. Again, like how you can learn more about this validation, you can go to the kubebuilder official docs, and there you can learn more about these annotation. Let's do the same for end time as well. And also I just need the required field for the replicas, because replica we cannot set the maximum and the minimum values, but we can have the required parameter. And now if I do make let's see the custom resource definition once again, so that I want to show you like how this is this thing is changing the feature there. So if you see this the end property is kind of an integer, but when we do make manifest, we should be able to see the validations here, like the maximum and the minimum value will be put up here. So you can see that the maximum value should be 23 and the minimum value should be 0. And also this is a required field, so you can see in the required section that these are the required fields. Okay, so yep, I think this is what I wanted to cover in this video. And do let me know, like, if you have any doubts or any queries, feel free to put them into the comment box and I'll be happy to answer them. And the link to this project you can find in the video description, so you can check the repository there. And yeah, this is what I wanted to cover in this video, and I hope you like this video. And if you did like this video, then please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.